Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Tonight we discuss India and its approach to the region. We peg it on a statement by India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, who said that Pakistan and China were working to create border disputes with India. Singh's statement was reported by the Indian media, and he made these remarks at a virtual event arranged for the inauguration of 44 bridges built in areas near India's border with Pakistan and China, including in occupied and illegally annexed Kashmir and Ladakh. The statement would be laughable if it did not indicate a desire by India's right-wing Bharatiya Janata Party government to keep the region destabilized. Except for Bhutan, India's border disputes with all its neighbors, including with Nepal and Bangladesh, two states considered close to India. Last year, on 5th August, India unilaterally changed and demoted the status of occupied Jammu and Kashmir in violation both of UN Security Council resolutions as well as bilateral arrangements with Pakistan and China. Since then, it has kept IOJK under an even stricter administrative and military occupation and has embarked upon changing the demography of the area. In Ladakh, the Indian Army is in a tense standoff with China's People's Liberation Army. India has also rejected a proposal by China in the latest round of military talks to defuse tensions. China had proposed withdrawal of troops by both sides on the northern bank of Pangong Tso, a high-altitude lake. In the past month, India has also tested at least 10 different types of missiles, including a longer-range version of BrahMos. The latest test of a subsonic cruise missile, Nirbhay, had to be aborted when the missile developed a snag. Indian media reports say Nirbhay has already been deployed at the line of actual control in limited numbers. The India-Bangladesh border continues to see firing by India's Border Security Force. Brad Adams, Executive Director of the Asia Department of Human Rights Watch, has stated that, and I quote, "Routinely shooting poor unarmed villagers is not how the world's largest democracy should behave." Let's try and unpack what Mr. Singh has said. We have with us Tahmina Janjua, former Foreign Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We also have with us Ravi Srivastav, an analyst and commentator on political affairs. Let me begin with Mr. Srivastav. Mr. Srivastav, one of the arguments that supporters of the current BJP government give is that Dr. Manmohan Singh was too soft. The problem with this argument is that while Dr. Manmohan Singh was soft, he was also clearly very perceptive, and during his rule as the Prime Minister, India's relations with the neighborhood were much better than after this so-called masculine policy. So give me a sense of, Ms. Rajnath Singh going on this whole thing about as if there's a tag team affair between Pakistan and China. Perhaps they need to look inwards and see where they're going wrong with their policy in the region.
I start my comment with your word used, masculine policy. In fact, the more than 10 years rule of Dr. Manmohan Singh, India had the best kind of relations with its neighbors. And there were not many skirmishes or border disputes or border fights taking place. Of late, in last 6 years, since this right-wing ruled BJP government has come in power, the things have been, first initial 4 years were rather peaceful. Our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, even happened to visit Lahore to attend the marriage ceremony or daughter of the then Prime Minister, Mr. Nawaz Sharif. All of a sudden, he made a detour and he went over there. But since then, since 2017-18, the relations have been constantly deteriorating. Mr. Modi made a lot of attempts by visiting to Nepal, to other countries, but things are constantly deteriorating, the relations are deteriorating. As a result, on 15th, 16th June night, India had a man-to-man fight with Chinese soldiers in which India lost, martyred its 20 soldiers, including a colonel. India shares 7,000 kilometers of the borderline with its neighbors. But the most sensitive and the most critical are with Pakistan and with China in Arunachal, in Ladakh, Depsong, Gansu. All these areas have become very, very sensitive. And one more thing which has come out very prominently as us, that Indian public, lot of citizens now do not trust the statements by its leaders, political leaders. You will be surprised to know that on 19th of June, post that 15-16 skirmish, our Prime Minister made a statement that nobody has entered in the Indian territory. But the fact remains that there is a land which has been occupied by the Chinese PLA army. And we ask a question, are we having a status quo as of 1st April 2020 on the borders? The reply is a plain no.
So, Mr.
then,
Shrivastava, let clarify this. You're saying that a majority of Indians now do not basically accept what the current government, including the Prime Minister of India, says. And you mentioned when he said in a speech to Parliament, he said that no one has entered our territory. And in doing that, ironically, he actually, disagreed with what his own Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, had said earlier, in which he had said that there has been a Chinese ingress. But has that impacted his political ratings? When you say that people do not really believe what he says, has it impacted his political ratings?
As you know, and we have discussed ample of times here on this channel as well, that there is a large majority of the Hindu community in the country which blindly supports the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. So as far as his political ratings are concerned, those remain unaffected till we see major elections taking place. A few are going to happen shortly in the states of West Bengal, in the state of Bihar, and some other states in the coming near future, say next 6 months or so. Will be seen that how his political ratings have improved, gone down, or remain neutral. But it's a fact that there is a very strong trust deficit between the public and its political leaders. The reason is obvious, that we are finding, the public finds, that there is lot of truth component is missing from the statements made by the political leaders. Prime Minister says one thing, you quoted, Dr. Jaishankar made some other statement, and the Raksha Mantri, the Defense Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, makes another statement. All three statements are at variance. So people are just surprised and shocked that what is the actual truth and what is actually happening on the borders. So that is causing a problem. Another fact is, since 5th August, when India abrogated the Article 370 in Kashmir, the situation is highly volatile there. And I think the number of events taken place in last 15 months or so, in which several lives have been lost of Kashmiris and Indian forces, I think it's the most critical area. So India is fighting on several borders, not alone China, but also on its Kashmir front as well. Yeah.
Right. One final question, Mr. Shrivastava. Before the program, I was asking you about the COVID situation in Mumbai, and you said that it's improving, which is great. But generally, and I've discussed this with Indian doctors on this program, the people weren't particularly happy with the way the government handled it. There are the farmers' protests, which obviously are kind of, in relation to the new laws which will tend to basically give the agriculture sector to bigger corporations. Then, of course, there is the issue of how the opposition is dealt with. We saw what happened, that unfortunate case in Hathras in UP, the rape case of a Dalit girl, and how the opposition and even the media was constrained from reporting it. So, you know, all of this put together, and of course the state of the economy, various sectors showing negative growth, high unemployment, still, as you mentioned, his political ratings have not been affected. How long will it be, you know, before this could change?
You have made a multi-dimensional question, Aizaz, actually. They have opened so many fronts at the moment. Yes, law and order is a big issue in the states of Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan. There was a rape case where the body of the girl was burnt at midnight at 2:30 by pouring a petrol on that, and that too by the UP police itself under the orders from the administration. So such precarious is the situation as far as the law and order is concerned. COVID you mentioned. Yes, Prime Minister made an initial lockdown of 21 days starting from 24th of March. And he said that perhaps we will win the battle within 21 days and the COVID will just vanish from India. So Aizaz, today after 8 months, India has got more than 71 lakh cases and more than 1,07,000 fatalities in India. We are the worst affected country in the world, I think number 2 after the United States. And still, it is not seeing the signs of receding in most parts of the country. States like Kerala, the states like Karnataka are having more than 10,000 cases every day appearing. So on COVID front, Prime Minister has miserably failed. Our GDP has gone down by 24% in the first quarter itself, which is precarious and leading to huge gross unemployment. The prices are going up and there is absolutely no signs visible, no green shoots visible that it will come up in the near future. Farm bill you talked about, it has another thing where the government makes, you know, its brutal majority in the parliament and makes use of that and passes the bills in both the houses of parliament. And then, you know, doesn't discuss with the opposition even. As a result, there is a strong discontent brewing up in the states of Punjab, Haryana, and several other states. So I think it will impact the political rating of Mr. Narendra Modi severely. But as I said in the beginning itself, that there is a strong lobby of so-called Hindu nationalists and all those people who blindly support the Prime Minister. Irrespective of his followers, irrespective of his misadventures, they continue to follow him. So it's a wild guess that how much he will be able to protect his political capital in the near future. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Ravi Srivastav, speaking with us. Let me go to Ambassador Janjua now. Ambassador Janjua, I really don't want to have my own question. I just want to ask you to comment on what you have heard from an Indian commentator in terms of both the foreign and internal policies of India.
Thank you very much. Obviously, your guest from India is objective and is trying to place all the realities on the table, the difficulties that the Indian government faces, that India faces. This includes COVID. This includes the fact that their economy is shrinking at a very fast. The fact that there are huge problems that are emanating. The fact that when COVID started, there were so many people who went from Indian cities into villages, creating a larger problem than that existed. And it was obviously a clear indication of mismanagement. This mismanagement, an irresponsible mismanagement, is apparent not only inside India, but in its relations with all its neighbors as well. The recent statement that you referred to earlier on by Mr. Rajnath Singh, which was rejected yesterday by our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, calling it as irresponsible and totally unwarranted, and as inexcusable lack of self-awareness, and that it all was based on expansionist designs of the ideology of the RSS and the expansionist designs of the Indian government, all of it, which led to creating problems with all its neighbors. When you see, Mr. Rajnath Singh talks about the collusive design and adversarial forces coming together. But Mr. Rajnath Singh is also blaming Pakistan and China for creating border problems with India. It is not Pakistan or China that has done that. It is India itself. It was India itself which on the 5th of August last year went and undertook a very big step, which went contrary to international law, which went contrary to the bilateral agreements between Pakistan and India, and even with China as well. Kashmir is now, more so because of the actions of the Indian government, a problem that is created by India between Pakistan, India, China, and of course, the Kashmiri people are important participants of this and have faced the impact of this current situation that India has created. India then went ahead and issued a map. This map went and changed its borders unilaterally with China, and its Minister of Defense went and spoke about Aksai Ching being a part of India. India itself has created immense problems for itself, and is now trying to prove to the world that Pakistan and China are colluding against India. Now, the statement that was made by Rajnath Singh has internal dimensions, which we've, of course, spoken of right now, and then externally it wants to send a signal to its Western partners to not forget Pakistan in this current situation that is going on between China and India. The fact remains that it is India itself that has created these problems. And basically, India is trying to now tell the whole world. There was a Quad meeting that was held early in this month, the outcome of which was not released. But the most important thing was that we don't know what the discussions took place there. But the most important, it appears that India is now going around the world and talking about not dealing with Pakistan, but having an Sino-Pakistan strategy, which is very dangerous because it is Pakistan, whatever Pakistan does, it does in its own national self-interest. And that is what must be remembered. And all this story about alliances, etc., are totally unacceptable.
Right. One question before I've also been joined by Dr. Adil Sultan, who's a former Air Commodore in the Pakistan Air Force and now Dean of Strategic Studies Department at the Air University. Thank you to Dr. Sultan. Dr. Sultan, I'll just come over to you, but I want to ask Ambassador Janjua, there are two things. If, this is an occupational hazard, I have to watch the Indian media. One, they're not particularly happy with Pakistan's role in Afghanistan, which is obviously been praised by the United States, by the current Kabul government also. And secondly, this theme is now recurring in terms of the so-called China-Pakistan collusion. Now, this is obviously, trying to create a narrative. And I seem to believe that this is a narrative that, that needs a pushback. Because while China and Pakistan are very close allies, the fact is that there is no collusion here.
What China is doing in its national self-interest, and what Pakistan would be doing in its national self-interest. Now, the Indian media, which is, of course, another hazard in my profession as well, where we have to keep on watching,
Yeah.
and listening to the Indian media as well. The Indian media is going absolutely berserk on this China-Pakistan collusion because it is their government, which has failed on many scores, is now trying to use this as a sort of a red flag to tell their own people and the world internationally that that they need to look at this collusion that is taking place. It has been rejected. There is no collusion that's taking place. And if there are additional soldiers that have been sent to the LOC, it is because of the fact that India is relentlessly hitting across the line of control, now hitting Pakistani, Kashmiri citizens on this part of the line of control, and therefore it is Pakistan's responsibility to ensure that its borders and the line of control is secure against. Let's not forget, India has made it very clear, repeatedly clear, that it will go and take action to attack what they call the POK or the Gilgit-Baltistan area. Now, Pakistan cannot sit back, hands folded, and watch this all happen. Pakistan has to take action in its own national self-interest. It is not any other country that it wants to develop any alliances with. Our defense lies within our own people and our forces who can handle the Indians very well.
Right. Thank you so much. It was Ambassador Tahmina Janjua, former Foreign Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, speaking with us. Let's get to Dr. Sultan now. Dr. Sultan, thank you so much for being on the program. As someone who has seen, understands nuclear strategy, missilery, arms control and disarmament affairs, give me your sense of, before you joined us, I was talking about in my opening, the last 1 month alone, India has tested about 10 different missiles. The last one, Nirbhay, the subsonic cruise missile, that the test had to be aborted because it developed a snag. What kind of signaling is this giving to China and Pakistan? And what kind of instability can missiles create, especially when there is a nuclear triad we are talking about?
Thank you, Ijaz, for this opportunity. You're absolutely right about these series of missile tests that also include hypersonic technology demonstrated vehicles and other missiles that India is carrying out. I see it both ways. It is to signal to the external powers, especially United States and other opponents of China, that India is there to preserve their interest, and if these powers help India to build its military potential, so probably India can hold on to China's rise. One, there are domestic compulsions also. We have always seen DRDO moving on its own trajectory, and these series of missile tests, probably they have found an opportunity to test more number of missiles, build up their inventory, both in terms of horizontal and vertical, in terms of numbers and their ranges also. So that's other. And the third is also domestic dimension. By testing these missiles, probably the Indian leadership and the scientific community also, they want to divert this attention or build this militant nationalism fever within India, that we are pitched against two adversaries, not one, and we need to build this capability, and the public needs to support. So it also helps, in a way, the political leadership to divert the focus of the Indian media or the public from their own inconsistencies or own failures. And there are many, as you have been discussing in the previous programs also.
Right. Now, let me ask you another question, because as a former fighter pilot, you understand the dynamics of air war also. So they've got the 5 of the Rafales in their new squadron, and those Rafales have been doing reconnaissance flights over Ladakh also. That is obviously signaling, and the pilots also need situational awareness and the rest of it. But if you look at the inventories on both sides, what is your assessment of the relative strengths and weaknesses of the PLA Air Force and the Indian Air Force?
If you're talking about PLA Air Force and the Indian Air Force, there's no match. In fact, Indian Air Force has not been able to address the challenge posed by Pakistan, or to talk about China. So I think this acquiring these Rafales, 5 Rafales, and having these photo opportunities by Defense Minister and the military establishment, it's again to pacify the domestic audience that we are building India's military might. Whether they will be actually able to deter Pakistan or China, that's another matter. It's all politics at the moment. 35 Rafales are going to do nothing against China. And against Pakistan also, they would they could kind of put some challenge to Pakistan Air Force. But in the end, what we saw in February 2019, the numbers do not matter much. It's more of how you employ these systems. And that has been one of the major inconsistencies in India's doctrinal development, both conventional and nuclear as well.
Right. Now, one of the that happened or did not happen during the Cold War was a direct confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. Came very close during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it got resolved. And therefore, the center held. The periphery was destabilized, of course, through proxies, but the center held, and there was no direct confrontation. In the case of this triad, Pakistan, India, and China, India has actually attacked Pakistan directly. That was last year. Of course, Pakistan retaliated with the PF's brilliant performance in Operation Swift Retort. India has also done the same with China. Now, is this something that you think the world should be greatly worried about? Because what we see is that there is no real rebuke to India. As a matter of fact, it's now become a very important part of the Quad, which is put together by the United States. So what kind of stability or instability are we looking at in this region?
Jaz, I'm always very careful in terming it as a triad. I have written and spoken before also. I term these two as two asymmetric dyads between China and India and Pakistan. So China and India dyad is mostly for optics, to sell it to the international audience and to get international assistance. What actually matters is India-Pakistan dyad, the kind of relations, disputes that we have, and the history of wars and crises between India and Pakistan, in which behavior of nuclearism was also seen from both sides earlier and more lately from the Indian side. So that's more dangerous. And this recent narrative that is being beefed up or strengthened, that China and Pakistan probably are colluding to destabilize India or create problems, that's also part of the same hyphenation that Indian leadership, political leadership, and the military leadership, they continue to project to their domestic audience and to the international observers. Look, China and Pakistan are together pitched up against Pakistan. But in the end, whatever military capabilities India acquire, India is not in a position to pose a direct challenge to Chinese military might. But it would definitely undermine strategic stability in South Asia. And I've always have been careful to define South Asia as mainly India and Pakistan. But what we see now is more of Asian or triangular competition. That's more of a narrative being built by the Western scholars and Indian scholars to justify their military potential, because whatever they acquire in the name of China, there is less criticism from the Western sources. But in actual terms, their military capabilities, and especially these missiles that you are mentioning, I don't think so. They pose a credible challenge to China at the moment. But what happens in the future, we don't know. But at the moment, this military capability, including the conventional and nuclear, mostly it is poised towards Pakistan. And that's very destabilizing. So if there is a real challenge or a possibility of a military conflict in the future, or any crisis going uncontrolled, that is between Pakistan and China, Pakistan and India, and not between China and India.
Right. No, I was mentioning the triad simplistically in terms of the three states being nuclear weapon state, but I perfectly accept your definition of asymmetrical dyads. But thank you so much. That was Dr. Adil Sultan speaking with us. We're now joined by Ms. Sitara Noor, who's a political analyst and is currently a senior research fellow at Center for Aerospace and Security Studies. Ms. Noor, we're discussing Rajnath Singh's statement that there's a collusion between between Pakistan and China. And the fact that India has tested like almost 10 different types of missiles in the last 1 month. The last one, the subsonic cruise missile, the test had to be aborted because there was a snag. So I just want to ask you quickly before I wrap up, how do you look at this in terms of, and what kind of impact is it likely to have on stability or perhaps lack thereof in this region?
Thank you for taking me on board. I think we need to see that this is not the first statement coming from Indian political leadership or the military leadership. There is a series of threats and such statements coming from multiple leaders, be it political or military, that where India actually perceives a threat which probably is non-existent at first hand. And I think the threat of two-front war, what India itself sometimes has said that they are willing to fight and they are ready to fight, this needs to be seen in perspective. In my understanding, Modi's India is probably following a policy: when you cannot resolve a problem, then expand it. And that's precisely what we have seen with regards to India's challenge on the northeastern border with China. And they want to add the western border on the Pakistani side just to show that the two countries are ganging up, and that such again doesn't really exist. Where India-China standoff has entered into 6 months, making it the longest standoff, where India is mostly on the receiving end. There have been 7 rounds of military talks, and to what have been concluded so far, in which China has an edge over India, and India at the most is denying Chinese presence on their territory or stating things which actually does not resonate with what actually is happening on the ground. So this statement is coming, another statement in this series is coming at a time when India is almost facing problem with all of its neighbors, yet projecting itself as a central pillar in America's policy in the Indo-Pacific region, or projecting itself as a net security provider. So that's a false sense of you may say overconfidence that India is trying to project, or at the same time showing that India is threatened. And that's why if it is unable to do certain jobs, that's because the countries are ganging up against India. And this is also needs to be seen in the perspective of what is happening at the internal level in India. This is all happening when India's BJP is facing criticism for massive mishandling of the pandemic, and the internal challenges, political as well as all the domestic challenges are increasing. And so that's probably, at one side, this is an attempt to deflect tension from the internal problems. And on the other hand, India's emergence as a global power or a regional major power or a net security provider, India's failure to come up to the American expectation. So this mix of both, in my view.
Right. Thank you so much. That was Sitara Noor speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss farmers' protests, growing farmers' protests in India. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Farmers in India are protesting. They're protesting in Haryana and Uttar Pradesh and also Punjab. And they're protesting against the farm bills, which were introduced by the Indian government in May this year. The bills deregulate prices and allow private markets to be set up outside farmer markets. Farmers fear that new system will allow private traders and agents to manipulate prices, and that would mean the lowest rates guaranteed by the farmer markets, what in the subcontinent is called the Mandi system, will perish. The pilot project implemented in Bihar reflected these results, and that has caused uproar in farmer communities. Critics say the new laws favor big corporations, and if the decision is not reversed, the food supply chain will go into the hands of big business. Sikhs from East Punjab are at the forefront of these protests. The new slogan is "Na dharti, na dharam." Neither land nor religion is safe in Modi's India. To discuss this, we are joined by Ranjit Singh Sarai, who's a lawyer and a member of World Sikh Parliament. Thank you so much, Mr. Sarai, for being with us. How do you look at these protests? I mean, especially in East Punjab and Haryana, which are the breadbaskets of India.
These protests are very interesting for a number of reasons. Firstly, this is a genuine people movement against the actions of the state. Interestingly, a lot of the political parties are trying to play catch-up with the authentic voices of the farmers themselves who are leading these protests. So this is not politically motivated, this is not opportunism, where you often see opposition parties rallying around a cause to embarrass the government. This is a genuine reaction from real people who see the real dangers behind these laws. And they are dangerous laws. Ultimately, they threaten the independence, the security of the farmers in Punjab. I'm only addressing the Punjab issue, but obviously it goes beyond that. And what's alarming behind this is not only that this is part of the Hindutva project, whereby they benefit their business friends and their corporate friends, which is ultimately where this is heading, the corporatization of farming. But also, there's a completely different, but probably more sinister element to this, which is that what this set of 3 new laws brings to the picture is the centre, Delhi, taking over agriculture. Now, agriculture under the Indian Constitution is meant to be an area where the individual states have the responsibility and have the power to regulate an industry or a sector. So this is yet another example of the so-called federalism. I say so-called federalism because although the Indian Constitution speaks of a federalist structure, the reality is far from that. But this is one more example. We saw it with the abrogation of 370 and 35A of the Constitution in Kashmir, as we all know about from August last year. But beyond that, we've seen other steps where the centre is unilaterally overriding all voices of opposition, centralising power. And in this case, the power that they are taking to regulate farming and to control ultimately the lives of farmers is an existential threat to the people of Punjab. This fits in squarely, I would have to say, with the pattern since 1947, where Punjab, in particular the Sikhs as a nation, have been denied their rights to determine their own future. This gave rise, of course, to the struggle for Khalistan, an independent Sikh state, to give effect to the Sikh nation's right of self-determination. And I believe these farming laws will feed into that process and give and accelerate the struggle of the Sikhs to become independent from India.
Right. Now, you have long been an advocate and campaigner for the right to self-determination for the Sikhs. But, when we talk to Indians, they say that as far as this particular strand was concerned, which gave rise to the Khalistan movement, this is now dead and buried, and what you hear about is just the fringe. Now, I want to get your view on how far is that correct? Is this something that is now gone, if the Sikhs really merged into the Indian Union, or as you say that this kind of, these kind of laws are going to give it a fillip?
It's absolutely not fringe. If it were fringe, India would not have committed genocide on the Sikhs. If it were fringe, India wouldn't continue, and they are doing continually, targeting Sikh activists through laws such as the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, targeting Sikh media, targeting Sikh political parties, targeting anybody and everybody who speaks about the Sikh nation's rights. So it's very much not a fringe issue. You need to be very careful about the narrative that you hear from the Indian side on this. This is the same. These are the same people who are feeding you the narrative that Kashmir is now settled. 370 was done. Statehood was removed. They became union territories, and it's done and dusted. It's history, and now this is just integral part of India. No scope for international intervention. This narrative is now being thrust upon us on the Kashmir issue, just as it was being thrust at the world in relation to the Sikh and the Khalistan freedom struggle for the last 30 years. And it's wrong. The narrative is wrong, and it's driven by a politically motivated fascist Hindutva state, which is committing atrocities on pretty much everybody other than upper caste Hindus.
Right. Thank you. That was Ranjit Singh Sarai speaking with us. We are also joined by Mr. M.J. Prabhu, who is a senior journalist, knows a lot about agriculture, both as a journalist and also as an organic farmer himself. Mr. Prabhu, I'm just trying to understand, and also for our viewers, what exactly are the grievances of the farmers in Punjab and Haryana and also Uttar Pradesh in terms of the new farm bills?
See, what happens is the new farm bill has been ushered in with a lot of urgency in the present circumstances. There have been two opinions on this. Some of them say it is against the farmers' interest, and another group which says that it is for the farmers to protect the farmers' livelihoods. Whatever be the case, the best thing would have been is to involve the farmers, get their opinion before any bill is being passed. Sadly, in India, right from independence, farmers have never been a part of any decision making regarding their issues. Even a person who's sewing tailor, who's sewing clothes, or a chappal maker decides the price of his product, but a farmer unfortunately does not have the right to decide. Right across the last 25 or 30 years, if you've seen any international meetings on anything, big gatherings on climate change, anything to do with agriculture, you will have so many international personalities involved talking about agriculture, how to improve agriculture, but there will not be one single farmer. There will be not a single group of farmers who will be given a chance to voice their opinion. This has been the case in the last, how many years? I'm just, for an example, I'm telling you last 20 or 25 years. But since with the time we got independence, farmers have never had a chance to voice their opinion. They have never been consulted before any decision has been taken for them. And everything has been done in such a way that ultimately the farmers have been bearing the brunt of whatever good or bad the government does. So in this case, if you would say, now there are agitation across different parts of North India, and slowly it's now boiling down to South India also. What should have been done is call the farmers, at least their groups, and they could have asked the opinion of the farmers. There was no need to rush in a bill, especially for a country like India. Geographically, it is a very big country, and more than 80% are small farmers. And you should have had their interest in your mind. Because, see, as a farmer myself, I have certain doubts when it comes to contract farming. When contract farming means you will have the business people getting into this. And it will be like
Mr. Prabhu, I'm happy you said this because critics basically are saying that these new laws favor big corporations, and if the decision is not reversed, I mean, this is their argument, they say that the food supply chain will go into the hands of big business. And they're basically saying that the mandi system, the farmers' market system was much better. And they also say that the pilot project in Bihar has actually shown the results that critics were fearing. Now, I want you to give us a sense of this argument.
See, I'll tell you one thing. I agree with the first part of the question that you had mentioned. What happens is when these big corporates get into the system, it will be like they will tell you what you have to grow. They will tell you what they need. And slowly and steadily, the food chain is going to change. The consumer will go to the mandi or any big mall, and he will buy the produce that is available in the mall. He will have no choice because the farmers have no choice. The farmers have no choice because the government has passed this bill, and only the big corporates get into this. Please understand, agriculture is a very big money-making industry. Agriculture is not something where you provide only food to the people. It is considered to be one of the most pious profession next to a doctor, a soldier, or a teacher. Yes, but the money that is involved in agriculture departments is something very big. For example, see, the government, I should really congratulate this present government because they brought in the pension scheme for farmers. Before this, the farmers, nobody took care for the farmers. But at the same time, at one point, you are really happy that you are getting a pension from the Kisan scheme. The other side is you push in a bill without consulting any farmers across the country, and naturally farmers are upset. See, farmers are basically very sensitive. They are very cautious. It takes time to win over their confidence. You cannot just expect a farmer to just walk over and say, "Arey yaar, chalo, I'm with you. Come on, let's do it." No. Centuries of farming. It's in his blood. It's in his genes. He has been cheated many times in the past. Even today, you see, you're talking of this mandi part of it. But the mandi part of it, it's worked in Bihar. Okay, fine. But in how many other places the mandi system has collapsed? For example, in South India, the mandi system has not been very successful. In parts of Punjab, it has not been very successful. So see, one thing is, I always used to tell farmers, both in my writing and while speaking to them, do not stop with growing crops alone. Take up marketing. Take up that extra effort to market. If there is a big gated community, go and befriend the gated community. Every person needs food. And if you're able to sell at least 300 kilos a month, that itself is a very big achievement for a farmer. Why depend on somebody else, or why talk of middlemen? Why get into all these things? Why don't you take up that aspect of self-marketing also?
Right.
I've been always urging the farmers to do that.
I you're saying. One final question before I wrap up. One of the things that critics of this government say is that it tries to sort of bulldoze bills and laws. Now, you also mentioned that this has been done in a hurry. Is there sense that this government thinks that it can sort of, unilaterally change things because it has a very large head count in Lok Sabha, which is the lower house of Indian Parliament? Is that sense correct?
In politics, anything is possible, sir, especially if you are in a very big majority and your winning comes down in a second term. Anything you take it for granted. You can do anything. That is politics. So when it comes to agriculture is a political game. The chai, the tea that you drink, there is politics in it. The water that you drink, there is politics in it. The food that you eat, there is politics in it. Whatever food that you eat today is a combination of 2 or more states. The produce comes from 2 or 3 other states. So politics and agriculture are hand to hand. So I don't think it's, given the present scenario, it will be very blatant on my part to say that certain things which I'm not supposed to be saying. But yes, this is politics. And if you are a major party, you are won for the second term, you take things for granted.
Right. You take things for granted till things begin to change. Thank you so much. That was Mr. M.J. Prabhu speaking with us. This is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.